Typically and historically, if you don't find your victim after 72 hours, the probability of you getting that victim back safe and sound is not good.
In a quiet Arizona neighborhood, an 84-year-old woman vanished without a trace. Security cameras were disabled, blood was found at the scene, and a masked figure appeared in the darkness. But investigators say a tiny detail, a mysterious item hidden in the suspect's pocket, may expose the person behind the shocking Nancy Guthrie disappearance. The night everything changed. For decades, Nancy Guthrie lived a peaceful life in the quiet Catalina foothills just outside Tucson, Arizona. Neighbors described the area as calm, safe, and the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen. Yet in the early hours of February 1st, that calm shattered in a way no one in the community could have imagined. Nancy Guthrie had just celebrated her 84th birthday only 4 days earlier. Family members say she remained mentally sharp, socially active, and deeply connected to her church community. She regularly attended virtual church services, spoke with friends, and maintained close contact with her children. But that routine suddenly stopped. And it stopped in a way investigators now say clearly points to something far more sinister than a simple disappearance. The final normal evening in Nancy's life began on January 31st. She had dinner at her daughter Annie's home, just a few miles away. Family members say the evening was ordinary. Conversation, food, and the kind of quiet family time that had happened many times before. Around 9:45 p.m., Annie's husband drove Nancy back to her house. Nothing appeared unusual. But within just a few hours, investigators say a carefully unfolding sequence of events began, one that now forms the backbone of a terrifying timeline. At exactly 1:47 a.m., something strange happened. Nancy's Nest doorbell camera suddenly went offline. At first glance, this might sound like a routine technical malfunction. But investigators quickly determined that was not the case. The system had been deliberately disabled. Whoever was outside Nancy's home had intentionally interfered with the security system. 17 minutes later, another sensor inside the house detected motion. But there was no video. The camera system had already been tampered with. Then came the moment that investigators believe may mark the exact point Nancy lost control of the situation. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker app, which normally communicates with her iPhone, suddenly disconnected. To medical technology experts, this detail is deeply concerning. Pacemaker monitoring systems are designed to maintain constant communication with connected devices. When that connection stops unexpectedly, it often means the phone was moved away from the patient, turned off, or removed entirely. In other words, investigators believe this could be the moment Nancy was taken. And after that moment, silence. Nancy never answered another phone call. She never logged into church that Sunday morning, something friends say she never missed. She also left behind something investigators say she would never willingly leave without: her heart medication. Because of her medical condition and mobility issues, authorities say Nancy could not simply walk away from home. Without her medication, survival would become difficult very quickly. This was not a voluntary disappearance. And when deputies arrived for a welfare check later that day, the scene inside Nancy's home raised even more alarm. There was blood on the front porch. Forensic teams later confirmed that the blood belonged to Nancy. At that moment, the case immediately escalated. Within 24 hours, investigators moved the case from a missing person search to a criminal investigation. Within 48 hours, the sheriff publicly stated what many investigators already suspected. Nancy Guthrie had likely been abducted. And statistically speaking, the case was already extremely unusual. Across the United States, hundreds of thousands of kidnapping cases are reported every year. But victims in their 80s represent less than 0.2% of those cases. In other words, crimes like this almost never happen. Yet somehow, someone targeted an 84-year-old woman living alone in one of Tucson's quietest neighborhoods. But what made the case explode into national headlines wasn't just the mystery of the crime itself. It was Nancy's family. Nancy Guthrie is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, one of the most recognizable faces in American television and co-anchor of NBC's Today Show. When news of the disappearance spread, media coverage intensified almost immediately. Suddenly, this wasn't just a local investigation. It became one of the most watched missing person cases in the country. Within weeks, investigators received tens of thousands of tips, and more than 400 officers became involved in the search. A $1 million reward was offered, and still no sign of Nancy. But then investigators released something that changed the direction of the case completely. Surveillance footage. The video revealed a masked figure approaching Nancy Guthrie's home in the early morning darkness, moving slowly, carefully, and clearly trying to avoid detection. The suspect wore a balaclava mask, gloves, long pants, and a jacket. A backpack hung from his shoulders. At one point, he raised his hand to block the camera. Then something unusual happened. Instead of immediately disabling the camera with tools, the suspect stepped into the yard, grabbed a plant from Nancy's garden, and used it to cover the lens. To investigators, this behavior revealed something important. The crime appeared premeditated, but imperfect, which raises a disturbing possibility. Was this someone who had planned the crime, but had never committed something like this before? And if that's true, the biggest clue investigators discovered may come from something the suspect probably never realized the camera captured. A tiny object hidden beneath his glove. An object that may ultimately expose his identity. The mysterious ring investigators say could break the entire case wide open. The masked figure who returned more than once. When investigators finally released the surveillance footage connected to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, it sent shockwaves through both law enforcement circles and the public. What the camera captured in the early hours of February 1st was not just disturbing, it suggested something far more calculated. Because the person who approached Nancy Guthrie's home that night didn't appear to be acting randomly. He looked like someone who had already been there before. The footage released by federal investigators shows a masked individual approaching the front of Nancy's home in complete darkness, moving carefully across the porch. His face is hidden behind a balaclava mask, leaving only his eyes and mouth visible. He is dressed in dark clothing, long pants, a jacket, and gloves, clearly attempting to conceal his identity. But what immediately stood out to investigators was not just the disguise. It was how the suspect behaved once he realized the home had surveillance. In the video, the masked individual pauses as he approaches the front door. Then he raises his gloved hand and partially blocks the camera lens. At first glance, the action appears deliberate, almost like someone who understands how surveillance systems work. But the next move surprised investigators. Instead of disabling the device with tools or tape, the suspect steps off the porch and walks into the yard. There, he bends down, pulls a piece of vegetation from the garden, and returns to the camera. He uses the plant to physically cover the lens. To behavioral experts and former federal investigators, this small moment revealed something important. The suspect may have planned the crime, but he had not fully prepared for the security system. Former FBI analysts say a professional criminal or someone who had thoroughly scouted the property would likely arrive with equipment to disable cameras quickly. The fact that the suspect had to improvise using a plant from the yard suggests the camera may have caught him by surprise. That detail has led investigators to an unsettling conclusion. This may have been someone committing a serious crime for the first time. And yet, despite the imperfect execution, the suspect still managed to do something extremely troubling. He managed to enter Nancy Guthrie's home. Security analysis of the footage shows the suspect moving around the front entrance area with confidence. His body language suggests familiarity with the property, not someone wandering aimlessly, but someone who seemed to know where he was going. Even more concerning, investigators later confirmed something that shifted the investigation dramatically. The masked figure had appeared near Nancy's home on at least 2 separate occasions before the night she disappeared. Images recovered from earlier surveillance recordings show a similar individual visiting the property on different nights. In one instance, the suspect was not even carrying the backpack seen in the February 1st footage. That discovery raised a chilling possibility. Nancy Guthrie may have been watched for days before the kidnapping occurred. Which raises the obvious question. Why would someone target an elderly woman living alone? Investigators began exploring several possibilities. Was the suspect someone who knew Nancy personally? A neighbor? A contractor who had previously worked on the property? Or someone who learned about her through another connection? Each theory opened new directions for the investigation. But the footage itself continued to reveal clues. The suspect is estimated to be between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 10 inches tall, with an average build. His clothing appears ordinary and easy to obtain, nothing distinctive that would immediately identify him. Yet a few details stood out. The first was the backpack. The bag worn by the suspect features reflective straps, suggesting it may be designed for hiking or outdoor use. Investigators later determined that it closely matches a 25-liter Ozark Trail backpack, a model sold widely through Walmart stores. While that might seem like a small clue, investigators say it provides a valuable lead. Retail surveillance footage from nearby stores is now being reviewed to identify anyone matching the suspect's description purchasing that specific backpack. But the backpack wasn't the only unusual item the suspect carried. Careful frame-by-frame analysis of the footage revealed something even stranger. Attached to the suspect's waist was a holster containing a firearm. But firearms experts noticed something odd. The holster appears designed for a large-frame revolver, yet the weapon inside looks like a small semi-automatic pistol typically used for concealed carry. In other words, the holster and the weapon don't match. That mismatch is significant because experienced firearm carriers typically use equipment designed specifically for their weapon type. The awkward setup seen in the footage has led experts to speculate that the suspect may have limited experience carrying firearms. Even stranger is how the holster is positioned. Instead of resting on the hip, the most common placement, the holster appears to sit awkwardly between the suspect's legs. Again, this is not typical behavior for someone accustomed to carrying a firearm. To investigators, these small behavioral clues paint an interesting psychological picture. The suspect may have planned the crime carefully, but he may not be a hardened criminal. And that possibility makes another clue captured in the footage even more intriguing. Because hidden beneath the suspect's glove is something investigators say could become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. A small, circular shape, barely visible through the fabric. But once analysts noticed it, they couldn't ignore it. It appears to be a ring. And if investigators are correct, that ring could reveal something deeply personal about the suspect. Something far harder to disguise than a mask or a pair of gloves. Because while clothing can be changed and cameras can be disabled, a ring is often something people wear every single day without thinking about it. Which means somewhere out there, someone might already recognize it. And that recognition could change everything. The tiny detail that could unmask the kidnapper. In complex criminal investigations, breakthroughs rarely come from dramatic confessions or obvious clues. More often, the truth hides inside the smallest details, the kind most people overlook. And in the case of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, investigators believe one of those tiny details may have been hiding in plain sight the entire time. It wasn't the backpack. It wasn't the weapon. It wasn't even the disguise. It was something far more personal. A ring. When investigators carefully reviewed the surveillance footage of the masked suspect approaching Nancy Guthrie's home, forensic analysts began examining the video frame by frame. Every movement of the suspect's hands, every shift in fabric, every reflection of light was studied in microscopic detail. And that's when analysts noticed something unusual beneath the suspect's glove. A small circular bulge in the fabric. At first, it looked like nothing, possibly just a fold in the glove material. But when multiple frames were enhanced and compared, the shape became clearer. It looked like a ring being worn underneath the glove. The observation quickly spread among investigators and crime analysts who had access to the footage. Some began circling the area in still images taken from the video. Soon, the question was being asked everywhere. Was the suspect wearing a ring during the crime? Sheriff Chris Nanos later addressed the observation publicly during a press briefing. And his response was telling. "I see it," he said when asked about the object visible beneath the glove. "People have pointed it out, and we are absolutely looking into it." To most viewers, a ring might seem like an insignificant detail. But investigators see something very different. Because rings are rarely random. Unlike jackets or backpacks that can be purchased anonymously and discarded, rings often carry deep personal meaning. Many people wear the same ring every single day for years, sometimes decades. A wedding ring, a family heirloom, a class ring, a custom design. All of these items can become deeply connected to someone's identity. and that makes them extremely difficult to hide. Even criminals who carefully plan crimes often overlook jewelry. They remember to wear gloves, masks, and dark clothing, but forget that something beneath those layers might still reveal who they are. That's why investigators believe the ring could become one of the most powerful clues in the entire case. Because somewhere, someone may already recognize it. Imagine a coworker watching the footage on the news. A neighbor scrolling through social media. A family member noticing the distinctive shape of a ring they've seen every day for years. Recognition like that has solved cases before. In fact, many major criminal investigations have been cracked open not by high-tech forensics, but by ordinary people recognizing small details others might miss. And investigators are hoping that may happen here. But the ring isn't the only strange detail analysts discovered in the footage. The suspect's weapon setup has also raised serious questions among firearms experts. In the video, the masked figure appears to be carrying a handgun secured inside a holster. But when specialists examined the footage more closely, something didn't add up. The holster appears designed for a large-frame revolver. Yet the weapon inside looks much smaller, likely a compact semi-automatic pistol. To gun experts, that mismatch is extremely unusual. Most firearm owners carefully choose holsters designed specifically for their weapon model. A poorly fitting holster can make drawing the weapon difficult or even dangerous. So why would someone carry a small pistol in a holster meant for a completely different gun? One explanation is inexperience. Professionals who regularly carry firearms, such as law enforcement officers or trained security personnel, typically use properly fitted equipment. But someone unfamiliar with concealed carry might simply grab whatever holster is available. And that's not the only unusual detail. The holster's position is equally strange. Instead of sitting comfortably on the hip or waistband, the weapon appears to be positioned awkwardly between the suspect's legs, a location that firearm instructors say is extremely uncommon. To investigators, these details add to a growing behavioral profile. The suspect may have planned the kidnapping, but he may not be someone experienced with weapons or violent crimes. In other words, the person behind the mask might not be a professional criminal at all. And that theory is reinforced by another piece of evidence discovered during the investigation: the gloves. As search teams expanded their efforts around Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood, they began combing nearby areas for discarded evidence. Roadsides, desert paths, and drainage areas were all carefully searched. Eventually, investigators located multiple gloves in different locations. 16 in total. Most were quickly ruled out as unrelated, the kind of everyday debris that often appears during large search operations. But one glove caught investigators' attention. It was found roughly 2 miles from Nancy's home, and it appeared to match the type worn by the suspect in the surveillance footage. The glove was immediately sent to a forensic lab for testing. Scientists extracted DNA from the material and uploaded the profile into the FBI's National DNA Database, known as CODIS, a system containing profiles from millions of convicted offenders. Investigators waited for a match, but none came. The DNA profile did not match anyone in the system. To some observers, that might seem like a setback, but investigators see it differently, because the absence of a match suggests something extremely important. The suspect may have no prior criminal record. If true, that would explain many of the strange decisions seen in the footage: the mismatched holster, the improvised camera cover, and the overlooked ring beneath the glove. But even without a database match, the DNA evidence still provides a powerful lead. And investigators are now using one of the most advanced techniques available in modern criminal investigations. A method that has solved some of the most infamous cold cases in history. Investigative genetic genealogy. And if it works here, the mystery surrounding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance may finally begin to unravel. The DNA trail and the backpack that could identify the suspect. As the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance expanded, authorities quickly realized they were dealing with a case unlike any they had seen before. The crime scene offered pieces of evidence, but none provided an immediate answer. Instead, investigators were forced to build the puzzle slowly, clue by clue. And 2 pieces of evidence soon emerged as critical: the DNA evidence and a seemingly ordinary backpack. At first glance, the backpack worn by the masked suspect in the surveillance footage didn't appear special. It looked like the kind of hiking bag thousands of people carry every day. But when investigators enhanced the footage and examined the design more closely, they noticed something distinctive. The reflective straps, the size, the shape of the pockets. After comparing these features with outdoor gear catalogs, investigators reached a conclusion. The bag appeared to be a 25-liter Ozark trail hiking backpack, a product sold primarily through Walmart stores. This discovery opened an entirely new investigative pathway. Because unlike custom equipment, mass-produced retail items can often be tracked through purchase records and surveillance footage. Investigators immediately contacted Walmart and requested information about recent purchases of that specific backpack model in Arizona and surrounding states. At the same time, surveillance footage from nearby stores began undergoing review. Every customer who purchased the bag within the relevant time window became a potential lead. But even with thousands of possible purchases, the backpack still offered something valuable. Timing. Investigators were able to narrow their search to purchases made shortly before Nancy Guthrie disappeared. Anyone matching the suspect's physical description who bought the backpack during that period would quickly attract attention. And that wasn't the only evidence connected to the suspect's clothing. During search operations across desert areas and roadways near Nancy's neighborhood, investigators began discovering discarded gloves. 16 gloves in total. Most were quickly ruled out as unrelated debris, items that had likely been dropped long before the crime occurred. But one glove immediately stood out. It was found about 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, in a location investigators believe may have been part of the suspect's escape route. More importantly, the glove appeared to match the style worn by the masked figure in the surveillance footage. Forensic teams treated the discovery with extreme care. The glove was sealed, transported to a laboratory, and tested for biological evidence. The results confirmed investigators' hopes. The glove contained DNA. That DNA profile was immediately uploaded into CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system, which contains genetic profiles from millions of convicted offenders across the United States. If the suspect had ever been arrested for certain crimes, the system could produce an instant match. Investigators waited, but the database returned no match. At first, that might sound like bad news. But in reality, it tells investigators something important. The person responsible for Nancy Guthrie's disappearance may never have been arrested before. In other words, the suspect may not be a career criminal. And that possibility matches several other clues already discovered in the case: the mismatched holster, the improvised camera cover, and the potential ring worn beneath the glove. All of those details suggest someone who planned the crime carefully but lacked professional criminal experience. Still, the DNA evidence remained incredibly valuable. Even without a direct match in the criminal database, investigators now possessed something extremely powerful: the suspect's genetic signature. And that allowed them to turn to one of the most revolutionary investigative tools of the last decade: investigative genetic genealogy. This technique became widely known after helping solve the decades-old mystery of the Golden State Killer. In that case, investigators used DNA evidence to trace family trees through public genealogy databases, eventually identifying the suspect through distant relatives. The same process is now being applied in the Nancy Guthrie investigation. Genetic genealogists analyze unknown DNA samples and compare them with publicly available genealogy databases. By identifying distant genetic matches, sometimes fourth or fifth cousins, they can begin building family trees. Branch by branch. Generation by generation. Eventually, the list of possible suspects narrows until only a few individuals remain. From there, traditional police investigation takes over. It's a slow process, but it has solved cases that once seemed impossible. Investigators have confirmed that the DNA recovered in this case is mixed DNA, meaning it contains genetic material from multiple individuals. This makes analysis more complicated, but not impossible. Specialists can often separate the profiles and isolate the unknown contributor. And that's exactly what experts are attempting to do. But the DNA discoveries didn't stop there. Forensic teams also found additional genetic material inside Nancy Guthrie's home. And surprisingly, that DNA does not match Nancy, her family members, or the DNA from the glove. That means investigators may be dealing with 3 separate DNA profiles connected to the case. The implications are enormous. It raises the possibility that more than one person may have been involved in the crime, or that someone else had previously been inside the home and left unrelated DNA. Right now, investigators are exploring every possibility. Each genetic sample is being analyzed independently. Each lead is being pursued simultaneously. But even with the scientific advances and forensic breakthroughs, one question continues to haunt the investigation. Why Nancy Guthrie? Why would someone go to such lengths to abduct an elderly woman living quietly in a peaceful neighborhood? The answer may lie in another mysterious development that appeared shortly after her disappearance. Because only days after Nancy vanished, a series of ransom demands began appearing. And they didn't ask for cash. They demanded Bitcoin. The Bitcoin ransom mystery and the questions that still haunt the case. Just days after Nancy Guthrie vanished from her Tucson home, the investigation took another unexpected turn. A message began circulating among Arizona media outlets. It was a ransom demand. But unlike traditional kidnapping cases where criminals demand cash or physical payment, this message asked for something very different. Bitcoin. The message claimed Nancy Guthrie had been kidnapped and that millions of dollars in cryptocurrency were required for her safe return. It included a digital wallet address and 2 payment deadlines. The first deadline was February 5th. The second was February 9th. For Nancy's family, the message was terrifying. They had no way of knowing whether it came from the real kidnapper or someone exploiting the tragedy for attention. But they made one thing clear. They were willing to do whatever it took to bring Nancy home. In an emotional video message released publicly, Nancy's children, including her daughter Savannah, spoke directly to whoever might be responsible. They pleaded for proof that their mother was alive and said they were prepared to cooperate if it meant ensuring her safety. But investigators immediately approached the ransom message with caution. Because in high-profile cases, false leads and opportunists often appear. And unfortunately, that is exactly what happened. Shortly after the ransom messages were sent, investigators traced one set of communications to a man named Derek Kalla in Los Angeles. Authorities say he had sent text messages pretending to be Nancy's kidnapper and demanded Bitcoin in exchange for her return. But it was all a lie. Law enforcement quickly arrested Kalla and charged him with attempting to send a fraudulent ransom demand and harassment. His messages had been sent through a Gmail account that investigators traced back to his home. The arrest confirmed something important. Not every ransom message connected to this case was legitimate. But that didn't mean all of them were fake. Because investigators soon discovered something else happening quietly in the background. A Bitcoin transaction appeared in the wallet address listed in one of the ransom notes. The payment was small, about $152 worth of Bitcoin, but it proved the wallet was active. The question immediately became, who sent the payment? Was it a member of Nancy's family trying to test whether the kidnapper would respond? Was it law enforcement conducting a controlled experiment? Or was it someone completely unrelated who simply wanted to see if the wallet was real? Right now, investigators have not publicly confirmed the answer. But what they do know is that cryptocurrency leaves a trail. Every Bitcoin transaction is recorded on a public ledger known as the blockchain. That means investigators can track how funds move from one wallet to another. While cryptocurrency can make identifying individuals difficult, it does not make transactions invisible. In fact, modern forensic tools have helped law enforcement trace cryptocurrency payments in many high-profile criminal cases. And that means if the real kidnapper ever attempts to move or withdraw funds from the wallet, investigators may be able to follow that trail. But despite the ransom messages, the surveillance footage, the DNA evidence, and thousands of investigative leads, Nancy Guthrie is still missing. As of early March, more than a month has passed since she disappeared. Authorities say they have received 40,000 to 50,000 tips, making it the largest investigation in the history of the Pima County Sheriff's Office. Hundreds of officers and federal agents continue working the case. Search teams have combed desert terrain. Investigators have issued subpoenas for bank records and phone activity. Genetic genealogists are working to identify the unknown DNA profile. And the $1 million reward remains in place for information leading to answers. Despite the lack of arrests, officials insist the case is far from cold. Former FBI investigators working alongside the local sheriff's department say new leads continue to arrive every day. Every tip, every clue, and every piece of evidence is being examined. Because somewhere within this mountain of information lies the key to solving the mystery. Perhaps it's the ring seen beneath the suspect's glove. Perhaps it's the backpack purchased shortly before the crime. Perhaps it's the DNA profile that has yet to reveal its owner. Or perhaps someone watching this story right now knows something, even a small detail, that could help investigators finally identify the person behind the mask. For Nancy Guthrie's family, the uncertainty is the hardest part. They continue to hold on to hope that she will be found and returned home safely. They have asked the public to remain vigilant, to continue sharing information, and to never assume that someone else will come forward first. Because sometimes, the smallest piece of information can change everything. If you have followed this case closely, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe the suspect was someone who knew Nancy personally? Was the kidnapping planned for days, or even weeks? And could the mysterious ring captured on camera become the clue that finally exposes the truth? If you want updates as this story develops and more deep investigations into the most shocking cases making headlines, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Because in cases like this, the smallest clue can sometimes lead to the biggest breakthrough.